You don't realize they're gone until the quiet feels heavier than anything they ever said, and by then it's already over. There's a kind of person whose absence doesn't announce itself. You don't hear doors slam. You don't see dramatic exits. There are no long explanations, no emotional confrontations, no final speech to mark the ending. They don't ask for closure the way most people do. Instead, they recede gradually, gently, almost kindly. And that's exactly why losing them leaves you disoriented, searching, and eventually facing something that feels permanent. You remember them as the one who just understood, the one who could sense a shift in your mood from a single word, or even from your silence. The one who showed up without being asked because they felt the change in you before you could even explain it yourself. They existed in your life in a way that felt almost unreal, like they could see parts of you that even you hadn't fully discovered yet. And because of that, you trusted them. You leaned on them. You allowed them into spaces most people never reach. But here's the truth people rarely acknowledge, even to themselves. The same traits that made them feel irreplaceable also made them fragile in ways you didn't notice. Because when someone experiences everything deeply, they don't just feel connection more intensely. They feel imbalance more sharply too. They notice everything, the subtle pauses, the slight changes in tone, the moments when something feels just a little off, even when nothing obvious has happened. At first, they ignore it. They convince themselves they're reading too much into things, that maybe they're being overly sensitive, that not every feeling needs to be questioned, so they give you the benefit of the doubt again and again and again, because that's who they are. They focus on the good in you, even when the signs start pointing in another direction. They don't want to believe that someone they care about could slowly become a source of quiet pain, so they stay. They keep showing up. They keep listening. They keep making space for you, even when no one is making space for them. And if you're not paying attention, everything looks fine at this stage. They're still replying, still laughing, still asking about your day, still being the same person you've always known. But beneath that surface, something begins to shift, not in what they say, but in what they feel. Because every time you unload your thoughts without asking about theirs, they feel it. Every time something meaningful to them gets brushed aside, they feel it. Every time you expect them to understand you without trying to understand them, they feel it. And the most important part is they don't react the way most people would. They don't start arguments. They don't create tension. They don't demand attention. They absorb it quietly, completely. And that's what makes it dangerous, because from your perspective, nothing seems wrong. There's no explosion, no defining moment where everything falls apart, just a series of normal days that slowly start to feel quieter, a little more distant, a little less alive. You might not notice it right away, but they do, because while you're living the relationship moment by moment, they're noticing the pattern. They see how often they're the one reaching out first, how often they're giving emotional energy without receiving it back, how frequently their needs get pushed aside just to keep things smooth. And that's where the internal shift begins. They start asking themselves questions they've been avoiding, quiet questions, the kind that linger. Why am I the only one trying this hard? When was the last time they checked on me without me having to say something first? Do they actually see me, or just what I give? These questions don't come all at once. They build slowly, like pressure behind something that hasn't cracked yet. And for a long time, they keep it to themselves. Because if the answers are real, it means something they care about deeply isn't what they thought it was. And that realization hurts in a way that's hard to explain. So instead of leaving, they try harder. They give more. They become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. They stretch themselves beyond what's healthy, hoping that if they just love better, communicate softer, show up more consistently, things will balance out. But here's the truth. You can't fix imbalance when only one person recognizes it and eventually even the most patient person reaches a limit. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but inevitably, because there's only so much emotional weight one person can carry before it begins to change them, before effort stops feeling like love and starts feeling like survival, before connection stops feeling safe and starts feeling exhausting. And when that shift happens, it doesn't look like anger. It looks like distance. They begin to explain less. They stop trying to fix every misunderstanding. They stop sharing their inner world so openly, not because they don't care, but because caring has started to cost them something they can't afford to keep losing. And this is the moment most people miss, because it doesn't look like an ending. It looks like they're just a little quieter, a little busier, a little more focused on themselves. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming, nothing that makes you stop and think, I might be losing them. But you are, just not in a way that announces itself. Because when someone like this pulls back, it's not to punish you, it's to protect themselves. And by the time you notice the difference, they've already been preparing for that absence for a long time. They've already started letting go in ways you never saw. They've already grieved parts of the connection while still being present in it. That's why when they finally leave, it doesn't feel sudden to them. It feels like something that's been quietly unfolding all along. And when you begin to feel that distance, your instinct isn't to look inward. It's to assume something changed in them, that maybe they're going through something, that maybe their life shifted, and in a way, that assumption protects you because it keeps you from questioning your own role. But the truth is, the change didn't start in their environment. It started in their awareness. At some point, without any announcement, they stopped focusing on how much they could give and started noticing how much they were losing. That realization doesn't hit all at once. It builds slowly, quietly, until it becomes impossible to ignore. A pattern where your needs always seem urgent and theirs always seem optional, where your emotions take center stage and theirs are handled silently so they don't burden you. For a long time, they accept that as part of loving you. They tell themselves it's normal, that maybe they're just better at handling emotions, that maybe you're just not as expressive. They justify the silence. They excuse the absence. They minimize their own needs to preserve the connection. But every time they choose you over themselves, they lose a small piece of emotional safety. Not all at once, not in a way that's obvious, but in a way that accumulates. Because emotional safety isn't built through big gestures. It's built through consistency, through being seen, being heard, being valued without having to ask for it. And when that consistency is missing, the foundation begins to weaken. So they start adjusting. At first, it's subtle. They share a little less, open up a little lower. They wait to see if you'll ask instead of offering everything freely, not as a test, but as a quiet hope. A hope that you'll notice, that you'll lean in, that you'll meet them halfway. And when that doesn't happen, something shifts deeper. Because now it's no longer about individual moments. It becomes about what your inaction represents, a lack of awareness, a lack of effort, a lack of emotional presence. And for someone who feels everything deeply, those absences aren't small. They're loud. Loud in the way silence can feel loud when you're waiting for someone to speak. Loud in the way distance feels loud when you're hoping someone will close it. So they begin to withdraw, not out of resentment, but out of necessity. They stop reaching out first. They stop asking questions they know won't be returned. They stop investing in moments that feel one-sided. From your perspective, it just looks like a change in rhythm. But for them, it's a change in reality. Because for the first time, they're not just focused on your emotions. They're paying attention to their own. And that awareness is disorienting. Because when you've spent so long prioritizing others, turning inward feels unfamiliar. They start noticing how exhausted they've been, how often they have silenced themselves to keep peace, how frequently they've accepted less than they needed just to avoid conflict. And that awareness brings a hard truth. They weren't just giving too much, they were giving to someone who had grown comfortable receiving without returning. And that realization changes everything, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that creates confrontation, but in a way that slowly reshapes their boundaries. Because once you see a pattern clearly, you can't unsee it. You can try to ignore it, you can try to minimize it, but it stays. It influences how you show up. It changes how you're willing to give. And this is where people make a critical mistake. They notice the shift but misunderstand it. They assume distance means disinterest. They think the person is becoming cold, detached, different, and in response, they apply pressure. You've changed. You don't talk like you used to. And on the surface, those words sound like concern. But underneath, there's an expectation that they will return to who they were without anything else changing. And that's where the disconnect deepens. Because from their perspective, the distance isn't random, it's a response to a pattern that hasn't been acknowledged. So when they hear those words, it doesn't feel like understanding. It feels like being asked to continue something that was draining them. So instead of moving closer, they step back further, not because they don't care, but because they're finally starting to care about themselves. And once that shift happens, it doesn't reverse. Because once someone recognizes their limits, they can't pretend those limits don't exist. They can't ignore exhaustion anymore. They can't unfeel imbalance. So they become quieter, more selective, more protective of their energy. And again, none of this is announced. There's no clear explanation, because by the time they reach this point, they've already tried to communicate in subtle ways, through tone, through behavior, through small changes. And when those signals went unnoticed, they learned something. They learned that being understood here required more effort than they could keep giving. And that realization sets the final stage in motion, because now the question changes. It's no longer, how do I fix this? It becomes, how long can I stay like this? And that question follows them through quiet moments, through conversations that feel slightly off, prof nights where they replay everything in their mind, trying to understand why something that looks normal feels so heavy underneath. Because leaving isn't easy for someone like this. Walking away from something they believed in doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like loss. It feels like failure. So they don't rush it. They stay longer than they should. They give more chances than you'll ever know existed. They wait for something to shift. Sometimes they even create space for it without saying it out loud. They pull back to see if you'll lean in. They go quiet to see if you'll ask. They stop initiating to see if you'll reach out. And when none of that happens in a meaningful way, the answer becomes clear, not through confrontation, through confirmation. Every missed moment becomes evidence. Every absence becomes clarity, until they finally accept what they didn't want to believe, that what they felt was real, that the imbalance wasn't temporary, that the connection was only deep on one side. And that realization slowly detaches them, because once they accept that they've been giving more than they've been receiving, they can't keep pretending it's equal. And pretending is what kept them there for so long. So something inside them closes, not their ability to feel, not their capacity to care, but their willingness to keep pouring into something that isn't pouring back. And that closure doesn't look like anger. It looks like acceptance, quiet acceptance, that this isn't what they need, that this isn't what they deserve, that staying would mean abandoning themselves. And for someone who spent so long choosing others, choosing themselves feels both powerful and painful, because it means letting go, not just of the person, but of the version of the relationship they believed in. And that loss is deeper than most people realize. So they grieve quietly, while still being there. Their goodbye doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in stages, invisible stages. They grieve the conversations that never happened, the understanding that never came, the effort that was never matched. And most painfully, they grieve the version of you they believed in. Because letting go of potential is one of the hardest things to do, but eventually something shifts. Holding on starts to hurt more than letting go. And in that moment, everything changes. Because for the first time, they stop asking why you didn't give them what they needed and start asking why they stayed where their needs weren't met. And that question changes everything, because now it's not about fixing the relationship, it's about protecting themselves. And protection doesn't look like confrontation. It looks like withdrawal. They detach emotionally before they ever leave physically. They stop investing in the future. They stop imagining what things could become. They stop trying to repair what no longer feels mutual. And from the outside, it still doesn't look dramatic. Just distance, just less presence, just less availability. But internally, the decision has already been made. They just haven't acted on it yet because they don't leave impulsively. They sit with it. They make sure they give it time so that when they finally walk away, they don't question it. They don't second guess it. And that's why when they leave, it feels final, no back and forth, no returning, because they already went through all of that internally. Because they already went through all of that, they already explored every possibility. They already exhausted every version of staying. So when they go completely. And that's the moment that confuses people the most, because it doesn't match what they expected. No big fight, no clear ending, just silence, distance that never closes. And you're left trying to understand how something that felt so steady disappeared without warning. But the truth is, there were signs. They just weren't loud. They were quiet shifts, less effort, less openness, less presence. And because they weren't dramatic, they were easy to miss. But they were always there. And by the time you start looking for them, it's already too late. Because this wasn't one big mistake. It was many small ones. Moments that felt insignificant, but added up over time. And for someone who feels deeply, it's not about what happens once, it's about what repeats, what becomes a pattern. And once that pattern becomes clear, it creates something stronger than emotion. It creates clarity, and clarity is what makes their exit final. Because once someone sees the truth without illusion, they can't go back. They stop waiting, not out of bitterness, but out of understanding. They accept who you've shown yourself to be, not who you could be, not who you might become, but who you could be, not who you might become, but who you could consistently are. And that shift changes everything. They stop chasing conversations that don't meet them halfway. They stop explaining themselves to someone who doesn't truly hear them. They stop staying where they feel unseen. And when they step back, it's not dramatic. It's just done. No announcements, no ultimatums, no final attempt to fix what they already understand can't be fixed, because their closure didn't come from a conversation. It came from realization. And that's why there's nothing left to say. Because everything that needed to be understood already has been. And now you're the one left with the questions, replaying moments, wondering what you missed. And the hardest part is you're not wrong. There were chances, moments where things could have been different, but those moments don't come back because they already forgave too many times while they were still there, and forgiveness without change eventually becomes distance. So by the time you understand, they're already gone emotionally, and what you're feeling now isn't just their absence. It's the realization that they found closure without you, and their leaving wasn't just about walking away. It was about returning to themselves, reclaiming their energy, rediscovering their boundaries, and learning what it feels like to exist without carrying someone else's weight. So when they leave, it's not because they stopped caring. It's because they finally started caring about themselves. And once a decision like that is made, it doesn't reverse easily. So if someone like this has disappeared from your life, Don't chase them, understand them. Reflect honestly, because losing someone like this is rarely about one mistake. It's about a pattern that went unseen for too long. And patterns don't change through regret, they change through awareness. And maybe next time, that awareness will be the difference between losing them quietly and keeping them in a way that never makes them disappear at all.